think so, unless somebody talks to us. I mean, I put it on here.
Yeah, I think I had it off.
That's how you turn it
That's
off.
all you do. Just that one button.
How do you make it lower?
There's a volume control on it.
It's on. It's on.
Where's Dad?
That was you.
I think you sit right here. You're good. The four of you can sit there, right?
There you go.
What do you need? No, I see it.
Well, then I'll bring another chair up.
Or,
You want to sit next to your dad?
I'd rather be with these guys.
I don't know. You're a lot better judge of character than I originally gave you.
40 years. Stand to the
Oh, you guys are, yeah. This is a. You guys have mini series? I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea how we're doing this now.
That's okay, this is our maiden flight.
It's okay, yeah.
Yeah, tough crowd.
I know. We got the hecklers.
That's right. Especially those college guys.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe when we start talking like we're doing it for 10 minutes.
We'll give him a big hand again. Yeah, you can start.
He took a home.
It's a went to get him. Luca went to get him.
Here he comes. You know,
What's that guy commercial?
when I worked in New York,
Dr. Bob,
Dad,
you're over here.
where's my sweater?
when I worked in New York, we had a couple of old guys. We had
Look at your sweater, come sit here.
Whenever this guy took his physical came in, we gave him a big hand and he passed.
We got it. Where's the crown?
I think we better try to tell Lita.
Huh?
I think we better
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you from the deepest part of my heart for you folks coming out. Brotherhood's trying something a little bit different, a little bit fun. Well, with Harvey pushing it, it'll be very little fun. So we are here to honor, probably, I think he's heard it from me a few times in the last couple months, one of the most important men in Brotherhood that I've been involved with. And
Would you like
thank
to
you.
clarify that?
Not while the lights are on.
We are reformed, you know.
It's kind of ambiguous.
Me, ambiguous? How when will that ever be? So again, just thank you, and I'm sorry that I'm the low part of the show. I'm going to hand all this over to Harvey, and we're sure to go even higher. So again, thank you for coming, and have a great time. Dr. Bob, in advance, I'm sorry.
Are you leaving, Andy?
Yeah, I'm hiding.
Oh, that's a good thing. So welcome to our first, probably this might be the last rotation. It's not funny, and most of the people around this table are not very funny, to tell you the truth. Dr. Bob in particular, you know. I mean, he is a man that's devoid of humor. I don't know if you know that or not. But listen, Dr. Bob, we've just about had it with you. You know, we made you Congregant of the Year. We made you winner of the Yerman Award. We made you honorary member, lifetime member of the Brotherhood Executive Board, and now we're roasting you. For Christ's sake, that's enough already, I think. Don't expect anymore. Nevertheless, with all of that, we have, hopefully it'll be a fun night for you. We have a lot of children and son-in-law here. They're going to talk. I've heard their stuff before. It's not very funny. Are you guys, you're doing the same thing you've always done. I mean, I heard it already. I'll probably leave while you're doing it.
You're the only one.
I'm out.
It's the same thing you've done for the last 4 years, right? Right.
It's okay. We
So,
can anyway.
and listen, I'm really surprised. I figured Bob doesn't have any friends. And actually, we figured I was the only one that he had, and we're not too sure about me. But then we also have Bobby Dickman, another person who's the board of humor, and Rick Lynch. I'm not sure about Rick. I know Rick's a great guitarist, I know that, but he doesn't bring his guitar down to the nation's capital because, as far as I know, your guitar is AC and Washington is not. It's an old joke. It's like the lights are always brighter in southern Manhattan because it's closer to the Battery. Same kind of thing. I like that. So we tried to get Dean Martin here. Now we were going to dig him up, but we couldn't get him. The closest thing we could find to somebody that was half dead here was Andy Jarofsky. So really, thanks to Andy for putting this all together. So a few words about Dr. Bob before we get started. Dr. Bob was born on October 20th, 1921. Is that right, Dr. Bob?
Yes, sir.
1921, a loaf of bread was 9 cents. A watermelon was 2 cents. You could go see a movie in the theater for 2 cents. 1921, Warren Harding was the president. Silent Calvin Coolidge was the vice president. I know you don't remember that. World War I had just ended. And in 1921, we dedicated the tomb of the unknown soldier. Some of the personalities of the day, which you may or may not know. Eddie Cantor, Ted Lewis and his band, Paul Whiteman. You remember Paul Whiteman?
Yeah, Eddie Cantor.
I remember all those guys too. It's just one word, so I'm hoping we'll work it out. The hit songs were Margie, I Ain't Got Nobody, Look for the Silver Lining. They don't write music like that anymore, thank God. Coco Chanel introduced Chanel No. 5. The very first radio broadcast of a baseball game was heard in 1921 in Pittsburgh on KDKA between the Phils and the Pirates. The very first Miss America pageant was held in Atlantic City. Let's see, who else was born in 1921, Bob? Nancy Reagan was born in 1921, and she knew that before she was born because she saw the stars, of course. John Glenn was born, speaking of the stars. Charles Bronson, Donna Reed, Sid Charisse, remember Sid? Yeah. I love Sid Charisse, I did, okay. Carol Channing. Rodney Dangerfield was born in 1921. Peter Ustinov. Who? What's that?
Just talk about the ones that are still living.
Much shorter list.
Carol Channing's still living, I think. Isn't she? I don't know about Peter Ustinov. Did he die? And Andy Jarofsky. He's dead. Lots of Jews began immigrating to Palestine at the time because the United States had changed their immigration laws for Jews coming from Eastern Europe. So, now I actually have Dr. Bob's resume. Why a man 93 years old still needs a resume, I don't know.
So you can read it.
He's looking for a job on it. Well, that's a pretty active guy. I understand he's going to be on the next season of Dancing with the Stars. I'm looking forward to that, Bob. But whoever, if you can't dance with the woman, I'll take it. I'll step in for you. So Bob got his undergraduate degree at the University of Vermont in Burlington in 1942. He went to Long Island College of Medicine in Brooklyn, New York, and graduated in 1945. His residency was at the Metropolitan Hospital in New York from 1948 to 1950. You were in the U.S. Army Medical Corps in where were you stationed, Bob? From 46 to 48? Japan. You know, because there was a story about you there. I know you went off the base one time, and you met one of the ladies of the night, and a couple of days later you had crabs, right? And you went back to her and you complained, hey, you gave me crabs. She says, what do you want for $5? Huh? You remember that, Bob? So Bob went into general practice in Edison, New Jersey, from 1950 to 1961. And he came to Lancaster in 1972. He went into private practice. Actually, he started working at Lancaster General. He went into private practice. You went into private practice in 72, from 72 to 83. And then 83 actually went into private practice until, really up until now. But I've gotten some of your advice and...
That's why I closed down.
an amazing career, Bob, and Dr. And thank God it's over, believe me. But there was once, Bob, I like to tell the story about Bob. I've told it many times, and it probably is true, Bob. I think it was you that when you called that man and said, I have some good news and I have some bad news.
Yes.
I said, Dr. Steinman, what's the good news? He said, you have 24 hours to live. He said, holy cow, Dr. Bob, what's the bad news? I meant to call you yesterday. So tonight we're going to start off with David, right? I have the order here. So here's Bob's son, David.
Excuse me, are there any
I am sort, what?
Excuse me, are there any rules?
Rules?
No.
Yes, if you pass the puck over 2 lines, it's an offside. If it goes from the red side, then it's offside.
The only rules are you cannot object.
You'll notice why I may not be able to read this very well. This was hastily done, and this kind of explains it. But, I had lunch with my dad on Thursday, and you all remember what Thursday was like, right? And we actually headed out to one of his favorite restaurants, and lo and behold, it was closed. So we had an interesting drive around town. We were probably, I guess, maybe one of a dozen cars that we ever saw at one time, looking for a place to eat that day, that Thursday. And we finally found a diner that was open, and we had a great breakfast at about 12:30 or 1 o'clock, something like that, together. And my dad was talking a little bit about his inability to get a haircut.
Oh, no.
This seemed to be really on his mind that day, getting a haircut. Now, I've
Which
heard,
hair?
talking about
Oh, is that wishful thinking?
it seemed to bother him a little bit. I didn't know what the big deal was. As another day of hair growth from my dad would not really end up with him resembling one of the Beatles. I didn't see him on Friday, the next day. This is after we had lunch together, breakfast kind of lunch. And I called him late this morning to find out how he was. I call him up a lot just to see how he is, and he's always fine. But he's always got something to tell me. And he said, I got my haircut this morning. This is Saturday. And I said, okay, what's the big deal with the haircut? And he said, casually, I wanted to get my haircut before my roast this evening. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? What roast? What's a roast? And he said, didn't I tell you?
I forgot.
It's like, I'm having a roast tonight at the temple. And I'm like totally quiet. I'm like, nothing, this is like I think it was in the afternoon actually. And I said, was I supposed to be invited? That was kind of a tiptoe, just to get that in there. And he was pretty silent. So anyway, he said, oh, it's on the other side. The other side's even worse than the first side. I said, I would really like to go, but I don't know what our plans are. It was already the afternoon, and I'll try to, I'd really like to be there. But I know that Jessica has to be home, my wife has to be home with my daughter, because for some reason, she had to be home today, and my other son was going to a sleepover. And so I said I would be glad to roast you, but no, the real reason I couldn't miss this is because we all love you. And to see you turn, and I'm very happy to see you turn from medium rare to well done. This roast in your honor. Thank you.
was a riot then. I'm not sure what, okay. There was a woman that came into Bob's office one time and he said, you know, she said, I'm having a problem with my memory. Bob says, how long have you had that problem? She said, what problem? Bob said the same thing to me on the telephone the other day. Anyway, we have a surprise for Bob. Bob's daughter, Beth, is next. You ready for this, Bob?
Yes.
I hope it's as funny as the last one.
It's a funny thing.
You guys are a regular riot, let me tell you.
And he's supposed to be getting
I
ready.
know. Hey, when you step up here, you gotta be ready to take it.
One flame broils all.
My dad did invite me to come, but he didn't invite me to speak. So this is the surprise. Only because he knows I really don't like to write and I don't like to get up and talk, do public speaking. I don't really enjoy that. But here I am for my dad.
Show them what yours looks like compared to mine.
Listen, I hate this.
Big print.
Hey, you think the back of Carter was long, wouldn't you?
But anyway, it's hard to roast a man who doesn't speak ill of people and is so accepting of other people's quirks and eccentricities. Perhaps that is because he has a few of his own. My father has had a number of nicknames over the years. Bobby, Insect, Rock Doc Daddy-O, One Beer Babaloo, and of course, Dr. Bob. He also could have been Boxer Bobby. No, it does not refer to the sport, for he was a long-distance runner and a swimmer. Imagine his children's surprise when we learned that his high school boys' team swam in the nude. Did you know that?
We
And
told
that,
us several times.
and I at one time wondered if any other school did that, or if it was just his. But we found out it was district-wide in Brooklyn, and I guess not uncommon here in Lancaster at the Y, the men swam nude also. But anyway,
Well, you got me thinking right now, that's not a very pretty sight.
but the kind of boxer that I'm talking about is the kind featured in Calvin Klein advertising campaigns. Once when I was in elementary school, the doorbell rang. Not an unusual occurrence. My father strode to the front door and opened it, dressed only in his boxer shorts. I was aghast. Not long after that, my parents hosted a neighborhood barbecue. My dad had a couple of beers, got a little silly, maybe a little loud, and he was encouraged to go inside and rest for a while. In no time at all, he made an appearance wearing, as you might have guessed, only his boxer shorts. I saw Mrs. Teich take her two boys by the hand and lead them home immediately. My dad is comfortable in his own skin, literally. He likes to sleep in the nude. About 5
Often
years
alone,
ago.
or often, yeah, often alone.
Often alone, much to his dismay. About 5 years ago, he was telling me how he had become sick during the night. He woke up feeling so weak that he wasn't sure if he would be able to make it to the bathroom and back to his bed. Happily, he did. I jokingly asked if the ambulance had arrived that night, would the EMTs have found him in his pajamas? And he declared, no, but I'm not ashamed of my body. I say, good for him. While hanging out in various states of undress over the years, my dad developed a love for cooking. He had to take over in the kitchen at some point in my mother's Alzheimer's journey. He often invited my family for dinner. He often brought dinner to our home also, but one evening when the kids were young teens, he greeted us at the door wearing a bib apron, sneakers, and knee socks. he did not appear to be wearing anything else. His grandchildren were relieved to find out he was wearing shorts, not of the boxer variety, but they just weren't quite long enough to be seen below the apron. Very recently, on a cold winter day when the sun was shining in through the windows, my dad got rather warm. And it happened that a couple of ladies came to visit that day. And they may have been surprised to find him shirtless on the other side of the door, but he thought nothing of answering it half-dressed. So now you know, Dr. Bob is humble, but not modest. You now may know more about him than you want to, but consider yourself forewarned, because someday you may see more of him than you would like.
I got that picture of Putin, with the shirt on. I don't think so.
Where do you think Putin got it?
I know. That was better.
A lot better.
So now, so that was that. Yeah, that was better. I was trying to. Something came to mind to Bob. There was a guy in your office one time, I think. A couple of guys sitting in the office, and there was one guy that he walked into your office like this, I remember. So about 15 minutes later, he came out like this, and the guy that was sitting next to him in your office said, "Holy cow! I didn't know Dr. Simon was that good. What did he do? Did he give you a shot? Did he give you a massage?" He said, "No, he gave me a cane that was 6 inches long." So next we have Bob's son-in-law, Tim Truman. Did he ever tell you he's not, he talks to me a lot about you. Did you know he didn't like you very much? Here's Tim.
40 years. Okay, this ain't long. It's hard to say anything bad about Bob, so I'll tell you a couple interesting things. In 1975, Beth and I fell madly in love, and usually are most days. One weekend, she decided to take her bashful Appalachian Baptist boy home to Lancaster to meet Mom and Dad.
Poor guy.
Yeah, things went pretty well for about an hour or so. We chatted, and then Bob and Ellen and Beth excused themselves, and I was left alone at the kitchen table. A few minutes later, Bob reappeared, and he kind of casually laid some stuff on the table. It was a pharmaceutical vial and a couple of hypodermic syringes. And so I looked at him rather wide-eyed, and he called to Ellen, "It's time, dear." And Ellen appeared, smiling pleasantly, and sat down at the table. Now, much to my relief, I discovered that Ellen had severe seasonal allergies, and that it was only part of her regular medical routine. Or so they said. Later that night, Ellen and Bob decided to retire for the evening, and Beth and I sat on the couch in the living room watching Saturday Night Live, first season. Yeah. We heard some feet on the stairwell and looked up, and Bob had come down to say goodnight. Well, you've heard what Beth had to say. I looked up, and there at the foot of the stairs stood Beth's father, clad only in a pair of blue boxer shorts. He reminded us to turn off the lights and when we went to bed, and then he marched back upstairs. Now, recent converts to Bobism have grown used to seeing his now usual attire. White button-down shirt, a pair of pressed blue jeans, some black sneakers. And you might be surprised to find out that Bob was one time a flashy dress. For many years, his semi-formal attire for wowing folks at the temple or his co-workers usually consisted of plaid jackets with huge bathroom tile-sized checks and a pair of eye-jarringly bright double-knit slacks. A favorite color being what I can only call Chevrolet Impala red.
Pictures, pictures.
We got him there.
Perhaps those injections at the kitchen table are actually some sort of drug designed to reduce visual stress induced by Bob's casual suits. On a hot day, when he was mowing, he lightened up a bit. You guessed it, topless. Naked from the waist up, a pair of well-worn but immaculately pressed denim shorts and a bandana in his hip pocket, lace-up work boots, knee socks pulled all the way up, and to top it off, after all this was the disco era, a white terry cloth headband. Olivia Newton-Bond. Anyway, they say that first impressions are the most important, and Bobby Steinman made quite an impression.
I want you to know, Dr. Bob, my opinion is changing you. It's changing minute by minute of you. It's starting to scare me now. So we saved the best for last, haven't we, Debbie? So, but I did want to tell one story about a woman that came into your office, Bob. And she said that she was having arguments with her husband, and every time when they had an argument, he was ranting and raving and just was practically going out of his mind. So you told her, well, look, every time your husband rants and raves, take a glass of water and start swishing it around in your mouth. And then, don't swallow it. Wait till he leaves the room or until he stops ranting and raving. A couple of weeks later, she came back and said, Dr. Bob, that's amazing. What is it about the water that helped me? She says, not a darn thing about the water, but you just kept your mouth shut for 5 minutes. Bob, you had a great presence in your office, let me tell you. So, Debbie is next. See if you can make this funnier than that. It's getting funnier by the minute, actually.
Pressure is on, I guess. Okay.
Well, Bob's not a funny guy. What do you mean?
So when Dad first told me about his upcoming roast at the synagogue, he said, "You have that sassy tongue." He says, "You'll do a good job." Don't hold back. I can take it. Wow. This was my chance to get back at Dad for all the times that he embarrassed me while I was growing up, with his permission. Wait to get started. I imagined myself as a female Don Rickles, shredding our honoree with my razor-sharp wit, bringing the audience to gales of laughter, while Dad endured it all with his customary good humor and good grace.
We're trying to imagine that too, Dad.
But as all of you here already know, there is not much to pick on in Dad's rather exemplary life, so I'll just share a few stories with you tonight. When Dad was growing up in Brooklyn, New York, one of 4 children, his reputation as a model child was established early on. In fact, he was so good that other mothers on his block prevailed upon their children to be a good boy, like Bobby Steinman. I'm sure they didn't realize that not only would this be likely to have the opposite effect, it would make it somewhat dangerous for Dad to join in with the other kids for outdoor games. A small mob might gather, chasing after Dad for setting such an outstanding example. When my granddaughter Minami first heard this story, she was in a state of disbelief. Not that Dad was such a good boy, but that he was called Bobby Steinman. She repeated his childhood name over and over. Bobby Steinman, Bobby Steinman, that just makes me giggle. Up until this point, Bobby was known to his grandchildren as Papa and to his great-grandchildren as Big Papa. This might be causing some of you to scratch your heads at this point. But since my oldest son was Papa to his children, Dad himself came up with the name Big Papa to differentiate between the two of them. As an aside, Nathan, my son, is about 6 feet tall, and Dad, is not. When Noah was about 5 or 6, he turned to me and said, "Bubby, Big Papa is not really very big." I couldn't deny it, but a simple explanation of how big Dad is in our lives, because he is the head of our family and because of how much we love him, sufficed. The issue of size came up again when Noah posed in Dad's woolen army bomber jacket and cap. Noah told Dad that he must not have been very big because Noah almost fit into the jacket. But if anything, Noah's admiration for Dad has only grown into a sort of hero worship as he views Dad as an Army veteran who parachuted out of a plane and as a doctor who had the power to save lives. Pretty heady stuff for a young boy. You may not know that Dad is the head of a small, elite cult, not surprisingly, called Bobism. This cult arose out of the sage advice Dad dispensed freely, if unsolicited, which generally began with, "If I were you," followed by any number of very practical suggestions. Our cousin Jed and dear friend Ed Home were early disciples. When members of Bobism gather, they enjoy related activities such as bobsledding, bobbing for apples, and the like. The group still convenes at least once a year around Thanksgiving to reaffirm allegiance to their leader. Dad's advice extends to every area of daily living. He has applied his substantial energies over the years trying to guide his not always cooperative family. This is usually something like, "I would run the ketchup bottle under a warm water after each use, and then that little crust won't form around the top." By the way, I have it on good authority that this same tip can also be applied to the dish soap bottle. I once did a sneak inspection of Dad's refrigerator, and it must work. Not a ketchup crust or collection of soapy scum to be found. You would think Dad might be discouraged after years of our failing to follow this and other simple suggestions for improved living, but he is the eternal optimist. Living life the Bob Steinman way has brought Dad to where he is today. A much beloved father, grandfather and great-grandfather, everyone's favorite uncle, a faithful friend, someone who has embraced and accepted change and loss, who remains accepting and non-judgmental.
Wow, Bob. Lady kids love you because the rest of us can't sing. Now we're going to get down to business, okay? There was one story I wanted to talk about. A man who came into your office and was complaining he thought maybe his wife was trying to poison him. Do you recall that? And you said to him, "Well, what makes you think she's trying to poison you?" And you said, "Well, you know, my food tastes funny. I've been lethargic for the last couple of weeks. I found this can of some funny stuff back in the cupboard. I think she is." Well, you talked to her, Dr. Bob, and you said you would. You came back in a couple of weeks later, and you said, "Did you talk to my wife, Dr. Bob?" And you said, "I did." He said, "Well, what do you think?" He said, "I think you ought to take the poison." You were good at that, Bob. You were wonderful at making people feel good. I want to say. But so our next roaster is Bobby Dickman, one of our own. Bobby's got an undergraduate and a master's degree from LSU down there in Baton Rouge. That's where you go when you can't get accepted to hack. Those people down in Louisiana, you know, they found a new use for sheep in Louisiana. While Bob was down there, wool. Bobby was in insurance. Of course, he sold insurance. When he first came to Lancaster, he went to look for a job. And there's an interesting story about you. And you walked into the office, and he said, "I'm looking for a job." The guy said, "Well, you know, I just hired somebody. I'm sorry." Bob, you said, "No, you have to hire me. I can sell anybody anything." He said, "Well, look," he says, "here's these two policies. See if you can sign these two guys up. We've been trying to sign them up for a year, year and a half. If you can sign those guys up, you'll have a job here. So you went out there, and sure enough, he came back a couple hours later, and you gave him the guy says, wow. He says, hey, did you get their urine sample? And you said, well, I didn't know anything about a urine sample. He said, no. You get a policy for over $50,000, you have to have a urine sample. So you got to go back out there and get it. So you went out there. A few hours later, you came back. You put the 2 urine samples down, and you had a 5-gallon pail, a bucket, and you put that on the table also. So the guy said, I got these. What the hell's with the 5 gallons of urine? And you told him that on the way back, you saw a sign in a hotel that there was a teachers' convention, and you went in there and you signed up a group policy. Here's Bobby Dick.
I like that. I couldn't get in the hat, so I went to LSU. What I didn't know, that James Carville was running around the same campus, but I didn't know who he was at that time, and it'd be nice to know him now. I didn't know that Dr. Bob sleeps in the nude. Wow. Do you all remember?
Go
Yeah.
very important.
Do you remember Hollywood Squares, Peter Marshall? Charlie Weaver used to be in that middle box. And the question was to Charlie, he said, Charlie, is it good to sleep in the nude? And he says, well, at the home, if you sleep in the nude, you wake up in the morning with a tag wrapped around your toe. Well, because I'm here tonight with Dr. Bob. Oh, by the way, Spitzer, if you see him dozing off, come up here and get him. Well, I'm missing 3 of my favorite TV shows tonight because I'm here with you. One of them is Looking for Bigfoot. Another one is Getting a Tattoo After Midnight. And Surviving Naked on a Remote Island with a Burnt Bagel. And if you ever have breakfast with Dr. Bob, and some of us do every week, he gets a charcoal burnt bagel with lots of cream cheese on it. Takes him 3.5 hours to eat it. I learned a couple of hours ago that there is a woman in Brooklyn, New York, and she attained the services of a lawyer by the name of Irving Brillstein. You remember that? Irving Brillstein, also from Brooklyn, yep. And the woman claims that 45 years ago, after Dr. Bob performed an annual routine physical, that she was fondled. Well, there's not much truth to this, folks, because Dr. Bob wore a stethoscope that was 4 feet 6 inches long, and when he moved around, so did that stethoscope, and that's what fondled the woman. So, even though your family is here, we don't think there's going to be any lawsuits on this. So right now we have Bill Cosby, 28, Dr. Bob, maybe 1. And a couple of years ago, Dr. Bob had this car that was as long as a city block. And if you ever drove behind him, remember that? Was it a Buick or whatever? Yeah, and if you ever drove behind him, you would think when he was in front of you, the car was on automatic pilot. You couldn't see the guy. And one Friday night, I think it was the first Friday, we came out of the temple about 7 o'clock, and Dr. Bob says, I'll take everybody downtown. It was Rick Lynch and Ed and myself, and I can't think of the other 2. And he was going to take us downtown, and he was sandwiched in between 2 cars on North Duke Street. We don't know how in the hell he got in that space. And the car in back of him was just a little bump, and the car in front of him had a little bump. It was minor stuff. And so Trooper Rick Lynch said, oh, you know why we call him Trooper? I can dive a little bit. Trooper Rick Lynch retired years ago from, was it the California Highway Patrol? Yes. Yep. He was assigned to then Governor Schwarzenegger of California at the governor's mansion in Sacramento. Well, one evening, and Trooper's job was to look after the governor 24/7. Well, one evening, the governor said to his wife, Maria Shriver Kennedy Schwarzenegger, I'm hungry. I'm gonna go down to the kitchen for a sandwich. But when he went down to the kitchen, he didn't go into the kitchen, Trooper was not there, we don't know what happened to you, Trooper, and Arnold slipped into one of the maid's bedrooms, and 10 years later, we learned that Arnold's got 5 kids. And everything was on tape, and the next day, the commissioner called you, and that he took an early retirement. Right, Kathy? Very early retirement. At 51 years old, was it, or something like that, you know? I spent 42 years in the insurance business, and I don't know, you can't retire in the insurance business after, what, 10 years and get a pension for life. I love this guy, this is wonderful. So Dr. Bob takes us downtown, because we're gonna get something to eat and look at the galleries, like it's the first Friday, and he's going through red lights and green lights and yellow lights. Here, people are dashing off, and he's bounding down the street. And you know, it's like driving with Jeff Gordon at the Dover International Speedway in this huge car. But we got down there and we parked and everything was fine. And for the last couple of years, we allowed Dr. Bob to take the reservations for the Brotherhood second night Seder, the Passover Seder, because he enjoyed that. And Dr. Bob had his chart on his dining room table. So if you ever walk into his dining room, there's a huge chart on the table, and as the checks came in, you know, Alan and Linda lost, he would put down there table 8, Alan and Linda, the whole family, and then another check would come in as he opened up the mail, and it was from the Dickmans, and the Dickmans said, we want to sit with the Lynches, so he put the Dickmans on table 11, and the Lynches maybe table 13, and the Woolmans sent in a check in, Jim and Sharon, and they wanted to sit with the Jacobsons. But for some reason, Dr. Bob on his chart had the Woolmans and the Jacobsons together, but when everybody came to the JCC that night, and it was a card table before we got into the social hall, nobody was at the table where they were assigned to. So the Woolmans were sitting on table 18, the Jacobsons may have been on table 6, and everybody was all over the place, and before the rabbi started his Shecky Green Passover story, everybody was yelling at Dr. Bob, this is not where you wanted to sit. You know, Harvey is over here, and Nicole's over there, and Dr. Bob would say to the woman, it's okay, I got the First Presbyterian Church sitting with you. So Jim, you can explain the whole Passover to them, and everybody get educated. And some people didn't want brisket, they wanted a vegetarian. And Dr. Bob says, no, you're going to have brisket. So you won't have chicken tonight. Eat the brisket and shut the hell up. But he enjoyed that. But you know, despite the car, despite the brisket, and then messing up the table, and ruining my 3 favorite TV shows tonight, and the woman that may have a lawsuit against fondling, that's okay, Dr. Bob. It doesn't matter because we all love you.
Really, that was great. You're not drinking tonight. You don't drink that stuff, do you? Yeah, I feel sorry for people that don't drink, you know. Because when they wake up in the morning, that's as good as they're going to feel for the rest. So our next roaster is Rick Lynch. Rick, of course, you know, Rick was in the military. He was a master sergeant. There was a story about his commander called him in and said, Sergeant Lynch, you know, he says, Private Johnson, I got a telegram here that his mother died. He says, I know you've had a problem doing these things. I need somebody to tell Private Johnson that his mother died. Rick says, oh, I can do it. He said, I don't know. He said, no, really, I can do it. He said, you sure? You have to be tactful and diplomatic when you do this. Rick said, no problem, sir, I can do it. All right, so Rick goes out. He calls the men to fall in. He says, okay, man, at ease. So everyone with a mother is still living, take 1 step forward. Not so fast, Johnson. Of course, Rick was also a police officer who stopped this man and woman one time in a car. And walked over to the car and said, you know why I pulled you over, sir? He says, no, I'm not really sure. He says, your sticker's old in the back there. It's about 3 months overdue. He says, oh, I know, I've been sick. I'm headed to the Department of Motor Vehicles right now, and they know about this. His wife says, what are you talking about? I've been bugging you to go get this thing a long time ago. Shut up, she said. He said, just you shut your mouth. Rick says, okay, let me see your license and registration. So he says, hey, your license is 6 months overdue. He says, I know, I've been sick. I wrote a letter to the DMV. They understand this. He says, if you don't shut your mouth right now, I'm going to shut it for you. Rick looks in and says, does he always talk to you this way? He says, no, only when he's been drinking. It's Rick Lynch.
So I'm not the comedic guy here, so I'm going to be a little serious for a few minutes. First, Bobby's got a little paycheck envy, but we won't talk about that. What I wanted to do is just to start off is just to share a few words with you. Affable, conscientious, fair, optimistic, intelligent, charming, dutiful, encouraging, helpful, humble, trusting, and a pillar of the medical community.
I thought it was me till you got there.
But enough about Nikki Kaplan. This is all about you today. I've known Dr. Bob since the late 80s. In fact, I think you were 87. Oh, you thought the high hair 80s? No, not that. We found out early in our relationship, he is a proud, lifelong Democrat. And he'll let you know that in a heartbeat. But not to get into politics. Don't you hate the whole birther thing? I mean, isn't that annoying and disgusting? Dr. Bob was born in Flatbush, not Crown Heights. Right, Dr. Bob?
Yes.
You always make that clear. It's important in Brooklyn. It used to be the 4th largest city in the world at one time. And he's very proud of coming from Flatbush. There is. Uncle Phil in the back right there. You ever see Uncle Phil's FBI file? It's like that. The guy was an activist forever. So at Minion, on Wednesday, we always have breakfast. And when I first started going to Minion, Dr. Bob would share some of his stories with me. You've already heard about 1921 Brooklyn, but let me add to that. The Yankees played in Brooklyn at that time. Hard to believe, but that year they bought 20 acres in the Bronx. The release of the movie The Kid, starring Charlie Chaplin. The first transcontinental airmail flight arrives from San Francisco. And to bring it closer to home here in Pennsylvania, police in Sunbury, Pennsylvania issue an edict requiring women to wear a skirt 4 inches below the knee. That was a law. Can you believe that? And Albert Einstein lectured in New York City on his new theory of relativity. Interesting times. He also spoke proudly of his family and their Depression-era struggle. He talked about Mom Frances, Dad Bernhard, sisters Ruth Ellen and Georgiana, brother Richard. And he told me his nickname was, and I hope I get this right, Boobson. She called you Boobson?
Boobson.
Boobson, okay. It scared me a little bit when he told me. I really didn't want to go there, you know. But growing up in Brooklyn, Dr. Bob had to establish his street cred, as the kids said. He told me about some of his early battles. I mean, these were epic battles, like John L. Sullivan and Gentleman Jim Corbett had, to where they would strip down to, I guess, boxer shorts. Just keep fighting until one man fell. And he had remembered this one fight where they had been fighting for hours. And I said, wow. But he respected his opponent. And he remembered his name. His name was Joseph Ewell. And I said to him, Dr. Bob, did he survive the fight? He said, yeah, absolutely. I said, what happened to him? He goes, I think he moved to California. I said, really? He said, yeah, he was a big hulking man. He towered over me like the Eiffel Tower over Paris. It was unbelievable. I said, he moved to California? He said, yeah, and he changed his name. I said, what was his name? He said, Mickey Rooney. talked about his resume, his colleges. What he didn't say is how he was offered a basketball scholarship.
To keep out of it.
And we've covered his military service. Now, he was a paratrooper. He was with the 11th Airborne. Their motto was first in Manila, first in Tokyo. They were known as the Angels. They had very many hard-fought battles across the Pacific. Of course, Dr. Bob was there for none of that. He was legendary among the geisha community. He was known as Babu-san. And that was because of his affinity for sake. He would, at the end of the night, stand on the quarter-ton Jeep and do some kind of dance. He became legendary. And he was also known as a great and efficient medical officer. In fact, he was the first to jump and the last one to land. They never figured that out. They couldn't figure that out. They said, why is that? And he said, well, I believe in maximizing my time, but you're the first one out. How was it your last one down? He said, I did 2 prostate checks on the way down. That's efficiency, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, everyone knows his dedication to the medical community here, absolutely. But I'd just like to share this little part here. I met him in Torah study. So being new to Torah study, I decided to sit next to him. I was sure that by being close to him, I would absorb quickly the sea of Torah. When the rabbi became animated, it's like some kind of bionic Barney Rubble. And you know, he pulls up the sleeve, the kippah somewhere over here. He's writing on chalkboards, he's going crazy. I couldn't keep up. The rabbi started his machine gun, rapid fire discussion, fully loaded with Hebrew, Aramaic, Yiddish. I knew I was lost. I turned and I looked at Dr. Bob for help. And he looked back at me and he said, how the hell do I know? I've been asleep for 30 minutes. What I hated to see happen to him is when he no longer could drive. For the longest time, I thought the temple had valet parking. Because when he parked on Duke Street, he parked on Duke Street. Is that man parking there? The other thing is when we went to AutoZone and he found out they didn't make 4-foot curb feelers anymore. Because he wanted them mounted on the front, the back, the sides. So that was a hard pill to swallow, right? Wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
He's always been a great mentor to me. He's a great guy and a good friend. And going through some of my hardest times here recently with family, he has given me sage advice. I love you, Dad.
I've learned so many things about you. We all have. It's amazing. You were cruel to this one guy that came in your office and said that nobody pays it. You know, he was sick guy. Nobody pays any attention to me, Dr. Bob. You said, next. So Dr. Bob, this is your chance now, okay? You get your chance to let us have it. Okay?
Okay.
So don't. Be very careful. Bobby Dickman has very thin skin. So. Dr. Bob.
Hey, I marked the letters, let him have it. The guy.
Take your shirt off.
That's all.
Yeah, really.
I think we should update.
No.
We're going to screw up the whole night.
Yeah. Couple little episodes. I got into, my father sent me to so-called Hebrew school, 10 months, and then the thing was finished. I don't know why, maybe it was me. And then I went back, and never went.
Use the microphone.
Oh,
Use the mic.
You can say we are.
okay, yeah. No, you want to hear this, is funny.
Sure it is, Dr. Bob.
No, I say, I went to this Hebrew school, and just it didn't last very long. One day, we used to play with the tennis balls against the side of buildings, you know, and have fun like that. All kids lined up. And one day, a guy that was a bully took my tennis ball because it was wood, new, and dropped the dirty one. So I went after him, and that was a mistake. He knew how to fight, and I didn't. I could wrestle, but I never got good at boxing. Anyway, the other guys got us around to the front, and between the angle of the stairs and the building itself, they started us fighting. And he was knocking the hell out of me. I was about 11 then, or 10, and he was really good.
He was 3.
Yeah.
He was 3. There you go.
Yeah, but all of a sudden, he stops and says, well, one of the guys there that was pushing him says, go after him. So he did something, I forget, and he dropped his hands, and then somebody else says, hit him, Bob. And actually, I hit him, to my surprise, broke his jaw. Really, and 3 of my bones in my, in my hand. So, as a result, I had to wear this old-fashioned plastic thing all over the way, and I became a champion after school. What is it called? Handball. Yeah. I could whack that hit so hard. And I got a new
Sport.
a new regard from the rest of the girls. Yes, I swam for the high school, and this is something interesting. The men, the boys, all through New York City, swam naked. And everybody that hears that laughs at, can't believe it. And I took to hating some of these bigger guys. They were saying these nasty things about the girls, about the women, how they're built and all that, you know, lousy. And some of these guys, as soon as they took off their clothes to get naked, you could see how sloppy their bodies were and all that stuff.
Not yours though, right?
What?
Not yours though.
No, I mean, that's what got me. They were making fun of the ladies and all that stuff. I had great admiration for my mother, who became a doctor after she had 4 children, and was very, very good and active. So I was always a defender of the women. Had 2 sisters and so and so. Okay, so I don't hate anybody, I don't worry about anybody. I'm just me. I'm satisfied.
It's been a labor of love tonight, you know that. All the things I said about you, most of them are not true. You went to Hebrew school. I didn't know you were Jewish till tonight. Really, thank you everybody. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Dr. Bob, for being who you are.
Harvey, you were a great master.
Oh, thank you. It was fun.
Despite
It was fun.
I got things mixed up. I was doing some of my form spiel. I didn't know what line to give.